Welcome to my channel, where manga and anime stories come to life in audiobook form. Here you'll find manga-inspired adventures, anime-style fantasy, action-packed battles, dark mysteries, and emotional story arcs. From powerful heroes and crazy plot twists to supernatural worlds and unforgettable characters, there's always a new story waiting. If you've ever said just one more episode at 2 a.m., you'll fit right in. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The atmosphere in the principal's office was quite different from what Sal had expected. The receptionist merely glanced at Divinity's cue card before immediately passing them through to Quest's office, and within minutes of their arrival, the two were face-to-face with Quest. Sal and Divinity sat in ornate wooden chairs in front of a heavy mahogany desk. The polished surface of the desk gleamed almost like a mirror, impressive enough to catch the eye. There was another empty chair to their left, and Sal wondered if someone else was expected to arrive. He nudged Divinity with his elbow to get her attention and tilted his head slightly toward the chair. Divinity did not hesitate. Just as her eyes began to cloud over to peer into the future, Quest's voice rang out from behind them, filling the office. No need for that. Quest closed the door as he walked into the office. Neuro is on his way, so we'll grasp the situation soon enough. Quest walked decisively to the desk and pulled a remote control from his vest pocket. He pressed a button once and a voice recording of a stranger began to flow from the speakers. Tower security report. A pillar of light appeared in the circular auditorium. The students present at the scene were identified as Salvatore Argento, rank 19, and Divinity Khan, rank 2. Witness statements describe the phenomenon as an angel, and the timing coincides with atmospheric essence levels spiking to an all-time high. The ability signature was identified as Divinity Khan, and the essence signature was identified as Salvatore Argento. Quest did not sit at his desk, but stood in front of it, leaning back against it. He was only a few steps away from Sal and Divinity. Now, this is the skill master, Salvatore Argento. From what we've already confirmed, this friend can copy any skill and push it to its maximum potential. Quest pointed at Sal with his left hand and gestured toward Divinity with his open right hand. And here is Divinity Khan, who can peek into the future. Combining the report sent by the security team with the information we've secured so far, you can understand why I contacted Neuro immediately. We want to confirm the future you two saw. And the best talent to interpret that vision is Neuro. Quest glanced at the closed door and sighed. By any chance, was there a big-ass dragon or something in your vision? Sal's eyes went wide at the principal's sudden use of profanity. Just as he was about to say something, Quest raised his hand and closed his eyes. No, wait, don't tell me. Let's wait until Neuro gets here. As an uncomfortable silence filled the room, Quest shook his head side to side. Forget the dragon thing I just said. We have a few people on our side who can see the future too. The problem is that they're making completely different predictions, and some of them are quite convincing. Quest waved his hand as if to dismiss his worries as trivial. Is there some kind of organization? The Doom Society. It's a team we put together. The name is a bit cheesy, but their skills are the real deal. Doom Society. We deploy resources and avoid disasters through that team. It's possible the vision you saw is already being blocked by them. So, you might not necessarily need to worry. Quest's words sounded like encouragement, but an awkward tension still lingered in the room. Sal realized that the dragon he mentioned was likely one of the unavoidable or unstoppable scenarios. Just as he was about to ask more about it, the back door opened, and a breathless Neuro appeared. His eyes sparkled when he saw Sal, and Neuro pointed a finger at him. So you were the reason I was called. Good to see you. A relaxed smile hung on the corners of his mouth. In those few short seconds, Sal felt far more comfortable than he had during the minutes he had spoken with Quest. Neuro gave a slight nod to Quest as a greeting and immediately turned his gaze to Sal. Do you mind if I take a look inside your head? Just to confirm what you saw. Sal felt even more favorably toward him due to his attitude of asking for permission, so he nodded in response. Neuro placed his hand on the armrest of the chair, lifted it halfway, and dragged it around to sit facing Sal. Recall all the scenes you saw and pull them to the front. Don't worry if your mind wanders. I can skillfully avoid that stuff. He closed his eyes and activated his ability. When he opened his eyes again, there was no outward change. He looked completely normal, without even a change in eye color. Sal wondered if he would ever be able to use his abilities without his eyes changing color like that, and at that moment, Neuro laughed. I told you, Sal. You have to give me a destination. Think about the things you saw. Sal shook his head lightly to clear his mind and recalled the visions again. He tried to slowly ruminate on what he had seen, but the scenes flashed by like lightning, losing their order. Sal didn't know how to arrange the sequence, nor did he clearly remember which scenes he had seen first. He took a slow breath and tried to organize what he had seen again with focus, intending to pass as much information as possible to Neuro. However, most of the scenes held little meaning other than the places he recognized. As his heart calmed, Sal followed the instructions he had heard from Divinity and recalled the forest full of branches in his mind again. He retraced the path he had walked within the vision, trying to connect which branch each scene had appeared on. You're doing well, Sal. Keep going. Nero spared no encouragement every time he recalled a scene. There was a scene Sal felt was particularly important, but it was one that would appear much later. He wanted to escape the highest branch filled with death and destruction, but some strange force kept pulling him toward that scene. That force showed the tragedy repeatedly from different angles, trying to identify the people and places. Sal gritted his teeth and endured the scene again. Then, finally, the force disappeared, and he was able to return to another point on the branch. His shoulders relaxed on their own, and a sigh of relief escaped him. Perfect, Sal. Do you remember what happened before that? Let's go down along that branch. Sal, barely realizing that Nero knew the branch concept he had discussed with Divinity, simply tried to show everything he could remember in a state of pure focus. Sal wanted to be as helpful to them as possible. The sharing of visions only took a few minutes in reality, but for Sal, it felt like hours. When he reached the point where the branches finally diverged, Sal consciously brought out the scene he had judged to be the catalyst. The surprising part was that Nero read that intention perfectly. He couldn't explain how, but it felt as if Nero was approving of that intention. Amazing, truly, amazing. Nero tapped Sal's knee lightly and leaned back in his chair. A wide smile was plastered on his face. You can open your eyes, Sal. The scenes you showed me were truly incredible. Then he glanced at Quest and snorted. That dragon didn't appear. Can you worry a little more quietly? He turned his chair to align with Quest's desk again, sent a reassuring smile to Sal once more, and began to speak in earnest. I'll have to submit a report to the Doom Society and share the information obtained from Sal, but I can tell you the basics right now. Sal confirmed 4 disasters in his vision, and they were clear to a level I couldn't even imagine. Like I said earlier, it has nothing to do with Kronos. So, the dragon apocalypse won't happen. Nero spoke in a nonchalant tone and raised his hand, spreading 4 fingers. The first is the Luna Tower we already knew about. Sal saw a scene where the northern defense wall collapsed and an invasion occurred because we failed to kill the lord of that tower. When he glanced at Sal and Divinity, the two looked terrified, but Nero shook his head. We are already monitoring that tower, and the strongest guilds are going to strike when it's at its weakest. Don't worry. Quest drummed his fingers on the desk, sending a meaningful look, and Nero didn't miss it. He folded one finger and continued. The second is a portal collapse in the hospital district south of the city center. Many injured heroes are wiped out at once, and enraged guilds rush in only to die. But we know the exact date and time of that portal collapse. We'll evacuate the hospital in advance and clear the portal before the collapse happens. Sal watched the third finger fold. Nero's voice was still calm, but this time, a strange curiosity lingered at the end of his words. We knew a dungeon break would happen, and all the information we had was about what happened after. But would you believe it if I said Sal saw the breaking point? He pointed at Sal and continued. We thought it happened on the coastal island because the break left victims from the Darwin cruise. But the actual location was the underwater port. I need to investigate this more closely, so I want to invite Sal to the Doom Society. I think he can dig a little deeper. It would be good to bring Divinity along too, to let her get a feel for things before officially joining. Nero kept his eyes fixed on Quest as he spoke. Only then did Quest's expression change. He realized they had obtained new information about one of the upcoming disasters. And as if there was no reason to stop it if that information could save more lives, he smiled faintly and shook his head. Sure, naturally you can take them. Just make sure it doesn't interfere too much with their classes. What is the 4th disaster? Nero smiled at Sal. One of the Academy's students gets expelled before they even get a chance to enter the red zone. That child's ability grows the most when facing death. Without the Academy's guidance, their mind eventually breaks and they become a disaster. How dangerous is it? Considering that child's ability, the 4th disaster has the greatest potential destructive power. But Sal has already proposed a way to stop that child. Quest's face went pale. Although he stared piercingly at Sal as he spoke, the question was ultimately directed at Nero. You're going to entrust stopping a disaster to a kid? Sal looked at Nero, and he nodded, granting permission to speak. Sal pondered how to explain the vision. He remembered the girl's pain, which couldn't be understood without seeing it firsthand, and he felt how great a wound her time at the Academy had been for her. Before speaking, he looked at Divinity beside him and smiled. We're going to become her friends. Then he turned his head to face Quest and said, and we're going to help her get into the savior class. Quest finally smiled and leaned back in his chair. He glanced at Nero, giving him a look of realization, and Nero raised both hands, laughing playfully. But where does the confidence come from that you two will get into the savior class? It's 30 people out of 1,000, that's barely 3%. Surely you aren't resting on your laurels with your current rankings, right? Just as Sal was about to open his mouth, Divinity stepped forward first. Then are you saying you won't give us any reward or recognition even though we identified and prevented a disaster? There was a hint of confusion in Divinity's voice. I don't feel motivated at all to look into the future again for this doom squad or whatever. The principal crossed his arms and shook his head at that answer. Neuro, you knew they would react like this, didn't you? Instead of answering, Neuro rested his chin on his hand and smiled. It was a look as if he was waiting for something. Then, looking past where Sal sat toward Divinity, he added, "But hey, aren't you hiding something you really need to tell us?" Normally I don't pry, but honestly, that thought is just radiating from you right now. Divinity coughed awkwardly, looked at Sal first, and then turned her gaze toward Quest. When Sal copied my ability, I think he opened something that was blocked inside me. I can't explain it well, but I feel stronger. The future looks much clearer, and I can see for longer. Neuro let out a long whistle and turned his head to look at the principal. This student can create mythos crafter gear, see the future, and even draw out other people's potential? He laughed loudly upon seeing the surprised expressions on both Sal and Quest. For this friend, 3% seems like a lousy probability. As Sal and Divinity headed toward the elevator, Divinity was pouring out apologies like a fountain. It was an apology for inadvertently letting slip the fact that her abilities had been strengthened because of Sal. Sal tried to put his complicated feelings aside and calm Divinity down, but his attempts had absolutely no effect. Every time she opened her mouth, Divinity unleashed another storm of apologies. Really? I wanted to tell you personally, but Neuro was right there. Plus, he already knew, and I was dying of curiosity. That's why it just popped out. I'm really sorry. It was a wonder she found time to breathe, as Divinity jumped endlessly from one worry to the next. No, but testing to see if such an ability really exists is exciting, right? Oh, sorry. I mean, I find it interesting, but from your perspective, being asked to replicate something you didn't even know about your own ability could be stressful. Seriously, it would have been better if I hadn't said anything at all. I'm so sorry. Divinity bit her lip and frowned. She was regretting her words, clearly pained by them. But it might not be that bad, right? If your ability really works that way? Wow. Then could I get angel wings like you? Angel wings? Sal asked back in confusion, but Divinity didn't stop. Doesn't that mean you can upgrade all the amazing abilities right now? Of course, like the principal said, it might be a temporary change, so we'll have to wait a day or two, but it's still interesting. Don't you think? Divinity's smile finally won the war between guilt and excitement, and Sal was secretly relieved by the outcome. He scratched the back of his neck and pressed the elevator call button. Well, it is quite interesting. I'm just glad they already knew about the disasters. Thanks to us, they know more about the third disaster, and if we join that team, we might get a bit closer to the savior class, right? As the elevator doors opened, Sal took a step inside, then turned around on the spot. The visions of the future he had seen still wouldn't leave his mind. Through those visions, his respect for the academy and the guilds had deepened even further. I wonder how many disasters they've already stopped? He muttered casually as if talking to himself and looked at Divinity. I stopped 3 before enrolling. If we can become friends with that disaster-level kid, that would be the 4th. Divinity shrugged, but she didn't lose her smile. I think it's good, though. Even if I miss something, someone else can catch it and stop the disaster. Sal had never thought of it from that perspective, and hearing it made him feel quite reassured. The future he had seen was too terrible and truly frightening. He was truly grateful that people like Divinity existed, looking into the future every day to protect everyone. Divinity was already an amazing hero, and that fact made him rethink his own efforts. He wasn't sure what contribution he was making to society. The conversation he had with Upgrade still lingered in his mind. Will I create something helpful to society someday too? Is there a way to utilize my ability better than just holing up in a workshop making gear? Until a few weeks ago, he had thought he would live his life working in administration for a large guild or returning to his hometown to help with the family auction house. But now he was someone who could foresee future disasters and craft mythos-grade gear. If what Divinity said during the meeting was true, he might even be able to untie the knots tangled in other people's abilities. Sal, are you okay? At Divinity's voice, he snapped back to reality. The elevator doors were already open. Divinity had one foot in the lobby and the other blocking the door to keep it from closing. Sal shook his head lightly and walked past her out of the elevator, looking apologetic. I have a lot to think about. I feel a bit lost, I guess. He gave a sheepish smile, but Divinity's expression didn't soften at all. Divinity grabbed his shirt sleeve to stop him, then looked him straight in the eye. I know exactly how that feels. Divinity pointed to her own eyes, then pointed to Sal's eyes. Do you think they treat a kid who can see the future as a kid? Had Divinity been seeing these disasters since she was very young? Those scenes were not something a young child should have to bear. Once you realize how many lives were saved thanks to that, you can endure sacrificing the joys of childhood to some extent. Divinity's voice lowered slightly, and she tugged gently on Sal's sleeve. I've been trained like that for years, but even now I sometimes get overwhelmed. But you? You were just living and working with your family. No one, not even you, knew what amazing abilities you had. Someone might have already told you, but Sal, you're special too. Maybe the most special among us. And I think you're going to be a truly great hero." With those words, Divinity let go of his sleeve and walked into the lobby first. "If you mention what I just said later, I'll pretend I don't know what you're talking about. So enjoy this sentimental moment, got it?" Her laughter spread through the air, and Sal smiled automatically. Her words resonated deeply, and the feelings of helplessness and pressure that had weighed him down lifted a little. The fact that he wasn't alone was the greatest comfort of all. "Thanks, Divinity," Sal said, shaking his head lightly. They walked together back to the dormitory. Exhaustion washed over Sal, and he had to focus hard just to get off at his dormitory floor properly. As he walked down the hallway alone, he reflected on how he had treated his body. He had stayed up all night making shirts, lost consciousness twice due to energy depletion and skill usage, and in the midst of that, experienced a scam-like event where a crazy healer forcibly drained his essence and then returned it. He had witnessed numerous disasters, and immediately after that, he had his mind read by Neuro. No matter how much Divinity comforted him, Sal still felt a heavy burden and expectation, and it was all crashing down on him at once now. The elevator doors opened, and Sal forced his body upright, stepped into the hallway, and turned right. There, Hannah was leaning against the wall, and a male student was pressed close to her body. Sal was tired, but he could read the atmosphere between the two immediately. The male student stopped his hand, which had been caressing Hannah's waist, and glared straight at Sal. Hannah seemed to hesitate about what to say, but Sal reacted very simply. "Have a good time." Sal had taken about 3 steps when Hannah called out to him. "Are you going to the party tomorrow night? They're calling it Survive. It's to celebrate our first week of survival," Hannah said with a laugh. Sal turned around to answer. The first thing that caught his eye was the male student's hostile expression, but Sal ignored him and looked at Hannah. "I don't know. All I can think about right now is sleep. Can I let you know tomorrow?" Before leaving, Sal noticed she was still wearing the gauntlet he had made. Perhaps because of his tired brain, he pressed 2 fingers to his lips and blew, mimicking her signature move. At that, Hannah laughed loudly, and the male student reacted as if he were infuriated. He pulled away from Hannah and approached Sal. "What do you think you're doing?" Before Sal could even blink, the male student fell to the floor. In front of him, as he clutched his nose in pain, a hard wall of blue light stood tall. Sal looked over the fallen student and saw Hannah doing the exact same gesture he had just mimicked. Hannah shook her head side to side and opened her door. "Think about the party, okay?" She entered her room and closed the door without giving the guy a single glance. Sal stood awkwardly in the hallway for a moment before quietly backing away to find his own door. The fallen student was still rolling on the floor, clutching his face. A few minutes later, Sal felt relieved to be inside his room, but he locked the door just in case. He threw off his pants and tossed the shirt he had been using as a blanket onto the floor. Seeing the workshop door, Sal frowned and walked across the room to close it. "Not tonight, Sal." Sal muttered that he would get into bed soon as he looked at it, but he had to wash up first. When he was a few steps away from the bathroom door, Sal discovered a package on the floor next to the entrance. It must have been flush against the wall, so he hadn't noticed it when he came in. Checking the label, it was the organizer board he had ordered from the credit shop last night. It felt like days had passed since then, but Sal made a promise to himself not to touch it until tomorrow morning. An hour later, Sal had finished his shower, but he had also broken his promise to himself. He was installing the newly received board. The workbench had been moved in front of the window, and the wall was gradually filling up with handwritten notes. Closing the countless tabs on his pad one by one, he filled his board with numerous goals and observations. Since he was young, the only way for Sal to organize his mind was to write everything down. An hour after that, he had recorded every vision he had seen and organized the entire roster of students in the silver cohort. He knew less than 10% of them, and Sal had no idea how he and Divinity would filter out the students at risk of expulsion. Still, stepping back from the board, Sal smiled with satisfaction. There were many parts that needed more refining and organizing, but at least he had managed to move everything floating around in his head onto the board. It wasn't even midnight yet, but Sal was on the verge of collapsing. He fixed his gaze on one name on the board for the last time and vowed to stop the 4th disaster somehow. Rank 986, Melanie Delahant. Necromancer. Sal's heart raced. An inexplicable sense of dread wrapped around his entire body. He stood in front of a locker with his name floating on it. To be honest, calling it a locker felt like a misnomer. Perhaps it was to promote fairness or allow students to create their own customized countermeasures, but this locker was more like a display case for equipment. The students were divided into 2 lines, and it wasn't until he reached the front of his line that Sal realized what was happening. Combat Introduction. Class 2. The girls won't be able to protect you today, you bastard. A sneering voice came from behind. Sal didn't need to turn his head to know who it was. That distinct nasal tone said it all. The man from the hallway last night, Hannah's guy, was a member of the silver cohort, and his black eyes had been fixed on Sal from the moment they entered the gymnasium. Glancing slightly to the left, Sal met another gaze. It was rank 999, the lowest in the silver cohort. He, too, seemed to remember the incident in the restroom on the first day of school, and his eyes pierced Sal with hatred. Sal gritted his teeth. Thinking today might be a day he gets beaten up, he braced himself and started changing clothes. He needed to think of a way to finish this combat class with as little injury as possible. Are you deaf? Or are you ignoring mid-tier students like us? This time the voice was closer. Sal tensed his whole body, expecting a shove from behind, but there was no contact. Sal's heart was still pounding, and perhaps due to the adrenaline, his hands clenched into fists on their own. At that moment, a shadow flickered at the edge of his vision, and the bruised eyes of the male student who had been bleeding profusely from his nose in the hallway last night came into view. For a supporter, you sure landed a good hit yesterday, didn't you? He glanced down at Sal's fists and grinned, baring his teeth. So, what are you gonna do? Sucker punch me cowardly like yesterday and run away again? Sal blinked and turned his head to face him. You know Hannah did that, right? You rushed at her and ran into her shield. Sal expected him to naturally be suspicious and pick a fight again. But the male student frowned, leaned his back against the locker, and said, Really? His voice was now full of curiosity, without a hint of threat. Sal slowly nodded and pointed to his own eyes. Yeah, I'm an appraiser. I can't make things like barriers. The student with the broken nose stared intently at Sal for a moment. Then, damn it, he slammed his fist against the locker. He shook his head and spat out curses a few times before grinning at Sal again. Sorry about that, man. Yesterday I was just seeing red. I thought you had sucker punched me. To think it was her. I never would have imagined. Sal laughed awkwardly, finished putting on his gym clothes, and held out his hand. It's okay. I'm Sal. He accepted the handshake without hesitation. Dave. Rank 669. Then, flashing another toothy grin, he glanced behind Sal and spoke. Hey, you bastard. What are you staring at? When Sal turned his head, the rank 999 student quickly looked away. Him and his friend jumped me in the restroom on the first day of school. In the end, his rank dropped to second from last. Dave looked at Sal with suspicious eyes. What did you do? Did you report them? Sal could sense a test in his tone. Shrugging, Sal looked Dave straight in the eye. I knocked his friend out with one hit. Just from Dave's burst of laughter, Sal understood immediately. His standard for friendship was strength and honesty. Did you hear that, you bastard? Your friend got taken out by an appraiser in one hit. Dave laughed and returned to his locker. Then he looked at Sal again and said, But I can't believe it. You're really a support class? You're not kidding. Sal tapped the side of his nose as he left the locker room. Dave burst into laughter again, and even as Sal walked away, he continued to joke around, teasing the lower-ranked student. With a few minutes still left before class started, Sal walked toward the testing area and began looking for Divinity. Hearing her insight before a fight would be a huge help. Charging in without knowing the situation could lead straight to a world of pain. The students around him seemed to know exactly where they were supposed to go. In the center of the gymnasium, there were terminals arranged around a large square cushioned floor, and they went out to the terminals one by one and took their places. A barrier similar to a monster containment field rose high around the square, acting as an infinitely tall cage. Sal thought the height of the open space looked to be at least 10 stories. Sunlight pouring through the glass windows illuminated the interior of the gym. Sal followed the students around him, looking for an unused terminal, and finally found a spot. But tapping the screen with his finger elicited no response. Pressing the screen with his palm yielded the same result. First time? A somewhat provocative voice came from his right. It was the female student who used pheromones as a weapon. Reflexively, Sal raised his arm to cover his nose and mouth. She burst out laughing at the sight. Relax, I'm not doing it right now. You have to swipe your cue card for it to work. She pointed to her terminal and swiped her cue card along the side, and the terminal activated shortly after. She gestured with her head for Sal to follow suit. When students fight, questions evaluating their performance pop up. Just answer comfortably. No need to be scared. At that moment, a red light turned on above the entrance they had just come through. She clicked her tongue and let out a light sigh. Slowpokes get punished. She looked at Sal again and pointed to the red light. If you come in after that light turns on, you have to go into penalty class. Then she lowered her voice and whispered to Sal. Rumor has it that in that training, they make you do combat drills until you collapse. Sal frowned, imagining the penalty training. At the same time, he secretly praised himself for not dawdling in front of the lockers. He wanted to thank her for teaching him how to use the terminal, but he couldn't recall her name. By the way, I'm Sal. She smiled and answered. I know. It was an unexpected response. Sal stuttered for a moment, but curiosity won out. How do you know my name? Sal felt good for no reason, but she soon pointed to the terminal with a sweet smile. With her lips pressed tight as if suppressing laughter, she looked at Sal's terminal, which he hadn't activated yet. Amidst a creeping sense of foreboding, Sal swiped his cue card on the terminal. The screen turned on, and soon two faces appeared on the screen. First match, Salvatore Argento, rank number 19 versus Dominic Walters, rank number 29. Sal's stomach churned. A mixture of anxiety and adrenaline rushed in all at once. He looked around and realized that most of the students were looking at him with expectant gazes. One large student was already walking toward the center of the battlefield, loosening up his arms. The opponent was beyond the barrier, so Sal couldn't even grasp any information about him. The situation was the worst. That man clearly seemed superior in combat to him, and Sal knew absolutely nothing about him. His mind was blank. Neither the speedster nor the healer, not a single usable thread came to mind right now. He only had his eyes, and his eyes were not a skill that could magically knock that man down. Mr. Argento. We finally meet. Welcome to combat class. A booming voice rang out from the closed entrance. The man leaning against the doorframe was tall and had a sleek build. In just half a second, Sal recognized him as a famous hero and professor, and inwardly thanked the heavens for such luck rolling his way. Sal instinctively activated his eyes as he opened his mouth, peering straight into the professor's ability configuration. I've been a fan of yours since I was a kid, Professor. Sal said honestly. Professor Rust laughed heartily and pointed to the entrance of the battlefield. As your peers know, flattery won't change the match schedule. Now, show me what you've got, Mr. Argento. Maybe starting today, I'll become a fan of yours. Sal blinked and smiled back at the professor. I'll do my best. As he lightly clenched his fist, his heart calmed, and excitement began to bloom within it. Professor Rust was one of the most popular combat heroes among all the guilds, having never lost a single battle. This was because his ability was a technique that always allowed him to turn the tables at the last moment. Absolute counter. No matter how big and strong the opponent was, Sal would be able to perfectly counter every incoming attack. The thread was already woven, and the preparation for activation was complete. He had never used it before, but Sal instinctively believed that this technique would handle any attack on its own. He could endure the muscle pain that would follow using the technique. If he could avoid humiliation in front of the offensive class students, it was a price well worth paying. But did anyone tell him? As Sal walked straight into the arena, Rust asked in a worried voice. Before he could even wonder what the professor meant, the answer hit his head like a lightning bolt. The moment he stepped into the battlefield, all of Sal's essence vanished. Not a speck of power remained. He barely managed to keep from falling to his knees as he listened to the professor's words ringing in his ears. At the same time, laughter erupted around him. Judging by that reaction, it seems no one told you. Mr. Argento, as you're feeling with your body right now, this is an essence-blocked zone. Your abilities and essence won't always be with you. You must be trained to protect yourself even when you are most powerless. I already gave this lecture to the other students on the first day, but I'll summarize it briefly now. Professor Rust explained the necessity and advantages of training without essence one by one. But Sal barely heard a word. His vision blurred, his palms were soaked with cold sweat, and panic washed over him. He barely managed to catch his breath, trying to calm himself down. He had to come up with a plan. You have about 1 or 2 more minutes to get your head straight. You can forfeit, but keep this in mind. Everyone in this room is required to write a report on the outcome of your battle. The longer you last, the more useful information will be collected. Good luck. Even amidst his trembling, Sal felt a smirk escaping him. He had been completely played. The moment he had feared since entering this academy was right now. The moment he had been avoiding, trying to get advice from divinity, and even attempting to fight by borrowing someone else's ability. Here, such tricks didn't work. He had no abilities in this space. He was just an ordinary person who had never received combat training. Sal intuitively felt that the time had come to pay the price for the privileges he had enjoyed so far. Looking around at the faces of the silver cohort students, Sal came to understand why his future self had turned away from them and avoided classes. In this prison-like atmosphere filled with mockery, contempt, and insults, he wanted to run away. Just then, he saw Divinity's face in the distance. She was looking at Sal with a terrified expression. He hoped that fear didn't stem from the future she had seen. Sal raised his head and straightened his posture confidently. And he looked at the opponent in front of him. The siren signaling the start of combat wailed. Putting all anxiety and anticipation behind him, Sal lunged forward with a speed that even he couldn't believe. The look of shock on Dominic's face was the best fuel for Sal. When his fist connected with Dominic's solid jaw, Sal felt as if his hand was rebounding. But thanks to the adrenaline coursing through his body, Sal didn't feel the pain and continued his attack. The series of punches he threw grazed Dominic's upper body and face. Dominic raised his arms to cover his face, and Sal dug in closer. The strength in his arms was fading, and the adrenaline was slowly subsiding. He felt like he couldn't hold on much longer, but his opponent was still guarding his face. No effective hits. The moment Dominic raised his arms higher to cover his face, Sal seized the opening, twisted his upper body, and threw an uppercut with all his might. His wrist collided with Dominic's rock-hard jaw, and both of them staggered backward at the same time. Dominic shook his head repeatedly and reached out his arms to regain his balance, while Sal grabbed his wrist as pain washed over him. He knew he had completely lost the advantage of surprise, and the moment Dominic regained his senses, he would be counterattacked. Turning his head, Sal caught sight of Divinity's face. Surprisingly, her face was no longer filled with fear. Instead, she was looking at Sal with an expression closer to shock. Then my defeat isn't confirmed yet? Dominic straightened his wavering body, and Sal intuitively knew that the time for decision was running out. His left wrist was already wrecked, and he was out of breath. He didn't even have the confidence to try a kick. Sal crouched low, bit his lip, and charged forward once more. He hoped to shake his opponent with a low center of gravity. Please. Dominic still had his face covered with his arms and couldn't see Sal clearly. But Sal couldn't let his guard down. Dominic was an opponent superior in both strength and stamina. Hearing Sal's footsteps approach, Dominic spun his body with lightning speed and swung his fist with his arm fully extended. The blow grazed just above Sal's head, and Sal realized keenly that Dominic was terrifyingly fast. But as the fist cut through the empty air, Dominic looked down. At that exact moment, Sal's shoulder slammed hard into Dominic's abdomen. Dominic had the wind knocked out of him without even time to brace himself. After landing an attack he hadn't even imagined himself, Sal rolled to the side immediately after impact and sprawled on the ground. Ugh. With a painful groan, Sal forced himself up. Raising his useless wrist to prepare for a counterattack, his mind was still in turmoil. Dominic was lying on the floor, clutching his stomach and gasping for breath, but Sal didn't hastily expect victory. Is it a trap? Sal twitched, watching Dominic nervously. His heart was beating like crazy, and adrenaline still wrapped around his entire body. What if it's a trap? I can't do anything anymore. Wanting to end it quickly, he debated whether to declare surrender or charge in to check if Dominic's condition was real or fake. The time that felt like endless deliberation ended in an instant. It's now or never. Sal charged again, and Dominic curled up his body while lying down, taking a defensive posture. Seeing that, Sal changed his attack trajectory, fearing his foot might break on Dominic's elbow. Sal tried to jump over Dominic, but his jump distance was shorter than he thought. Perhaps the sensation of the speedster ability he used a few days ago still lingered. The current ordinary Sal couldn't clear Dominic and fell right on top of him, driving both elbows squarely into Dominic's side. Arg! Dominic's pain scream echoed throughout the gymnasium, and Sal rolled off Dominic, his mind hazy. At that moment, Professor Rust, the instructor, approached and grabbed Sal's hand. Sal couldn't hear a single word coming from the professor's mouth. His body was still trembling, and he was half out of it. It was only when the professor led him out of the ring that the sensation of essence returning to his body washed over him. Like a warm embrace, the essence wrapped around his entire body, and clear consciousness returned. Sal turned his head to look at Dominic. A medical officer in a white uniform was kneeling, placing a palm on Dominic's ribs. The surroundings seemed engulfed in silence, but gradually Sal's hearing returned, and sounds began to filter in one by one. He opened his eyes wide in surprise. Many students of the silver cohort were applauding him. Professor Rust was also clapping, and it took a few seconds for Sal to realize it was directed at him. Mr. Salvatore Argento, I think you've gained quite a few new fans today. Myself included. It took nearly an hour for the adrenaline to leave Sal's system. He watched the next 6 matches in a daze. Some matches ended in just a few minutes, like his own. That was only a few minutes? To Sal, his own fight had felt incredibly long. But in cases with cautious matchups or timid participants, it took much longer. There was only one match filled with action, and watching that fight, Sal clutched his terminal tightly, overwhelmed by the fierce punches and kicks. Combat class was scheduled for the whole day, and it seemed they would see the entire silver cohort face off against each other. By the way, I'm Victoria. The moment the 10th match concluded, the girl next to him suddenly introduced herself. Sal didn't immediately understand what she said because he was busy inputting the combat analysis at the time. When he looked up, she was looking at him with a warm smile. She pointed at Sal's face as if explaining her actions. I said my name the first 4 times, but you had a face like you didn't hear a thing. It finally got through on the 5th try. As Sal tried to apologize, Victoria raised her hand to stop him. It's okay. It's been a while since I was ignored by a boy, so it was kind of fresh. Around the 3rd time, I even considered charming you to make you react. She smiled at Sal occasionally as she inputted her own content into the terminal. but your fight was really unexpected. I bet everyone was surprised, not just me. Sal scratched the back of his head, feeling a bit embarrassed. That fight felt distant like a dream now, and he wanted to forget it as soon as possible. But Victoria seemed keen on continuing to talk about it. Dominic is pretty strong. Everyone thought he was practically guaranteed a spot in the savior class, but you beat him. She shook her head as if she still couldn't understand, trying to fish for some clue, but Sal said nothing. All he could do was shrug, and even that made Victoria laugh louder. No, shouldn't you be bragging a little? You just took down a defender type. Sal stopped in his tracks at those words. He had thought of Dominic purely as an offensive type and hadn't considered the possibility of him being any other class. He had assumed Dominic was an offensive type simply because he was strong and fast. Sal vowed inwardly to research his cohort peers more thoroughly. Thinking of people only within the boxes of offensive or support types seemed wrong. You're thinking of the controller class, right? Sal asked Victoria. A bright smile bloomed on Victoria's face. Bingo. There are a few strong controllers in our grade, but in the silver cohort, I'm the strongest. Despite her tone, Sal didn't think Victoria was bragging or exaggerating. It felt like she was just stating a simple fact. Victoria turned to Sal and tilted her head. What about you? Can you still call yourself a supporter after that fight earlier? If you keep doing that, the academy might put you in the offensive class. Sal looked at his terminal and shook his head. I'm definitely a support type. That fight was pure luck, and I can't do it again. If I fought again, I'd lose in an instant. Sal answered honestly as he watched the next combatants enter. Victoria didn't pry any further, and they began monitoring the ensuing battles in silence for a while. After 5 or 6 battles, Victoria finally spoke up again. What did you really do with Hannah? Sal flushed red at those words, taken aback. But Victoria wasn't even looking at Sal. Her mouth was full of a mischievous smile. Predictable reaction. At Victoria's playful teasing, Sal was speechless, not knowing how to explain. He couldn't decide whether to deny it or admit it. If Hannah hadn't told her, there would be no way for her to know. How on earth does Victoria know Hannah? Sal's mind was full of confusion, but Victoria didn't give him time to think deeply. I'm planning a party tonight. Oh right, I'll invite you too. It's like a mixer with kids from each cohort. I was chatting with some girls from other cohorts in the cafeteria and ran into Hannah. She was bragging about her new gear like crazy. Victoria wiggled her fingers, making a gesture reminiscent of Hannah's gauntlet. She was itching to tell us how amazing her new crafter friend is. Victoria's voice dropped as if sharing a conspiracy, and her smile curled up even more mischievously. She was going on about how much attention he pays to every single detail, how he won't finish until the gear is perfect or whatever. Doesn't he sound like a really trustworthy crafter? She raised an eyebrow and curled the corner of her mouth. So, Sal, what do I have to do to get a gauntlet made too? Sal looked back and forth between Victoria and the cage where the arena was, seriously considering fighting Dominic one more time just to avoid this conversation. Since he couldn't tell if she was just teasing or genuinely interested, he decided to respond safely with information he knew for sure. Bring the materials you need and what you want to make, and I'll give you a quote. Whether Victoria was serious or joking, at least he wasn't easily swayed. Victoria looked slightly disappointed but soon shrugged and accepted it. You're no fun. Sal turned his gaze back to the arena, trying to focus as much as possible. On one hand, it was good research. He could see with his own eyes what combat capabilities his silver cohort peers possessed in actual combat. However, on the other hand, it wasn't helpful because he still couldn't figure out exactly what their abilities were. He also felt that ranking was incomplete for evaluating potential as a hero. Above all, no matter how many times he tried, he still couldn't see through the barrier. The only reward he got was discovering a blueprint to upgrade the terminal in front of him, which was so ridiculous it almost made him laugh at that moment. Victoria focused on her terminal and didn't speak to him anymore, which made Sal much more comfortable. However, he still wondered what on earth Hannah had told her, and he thought he definitely needed to clear that matter up at the party tonight. Just then, the professor's voice filled the stadium. Attention everyone. We will pause the sparring for a moment. Professor Rust raised his hand in the center of the ring to draw attention. You showed some truly wonderful matches today. I want to emphasize once again why this training is so crucial for your growth. In the first class, you fought using your respective abilities, and you earned your ranks as a result. But, do you think you are nothing more than your innate abilities? Rust slowly scanned the faces of the students standing in front of the terminals as he continued. What will you do when you run out of essence on the battlefield? Will you just give up? The generations that lived before you were weaker than you are now. They fought with only their wits and bodies. We are their descendants. Professor Rust raised his arm to point at the group of students, then slowly turned, gesturing to each one. All of you here came to become heroes. We don't need anyone who can't become a hero without abilities. Even less so those filled only with arrogance. Rust grinned and lowered his arm. To relearn from the bottom up, you must first know your weaknesses accurately. I looked at a few reports, and calling them half-assed would be a compliment. Do this assignment sincerely. That is the way to help your comrades. Assignment. Watching other people fight is inherently fun, isn't it? Write down everything that frustrated you while watching. Point it out. If this still doesn't motivate you, I'll give Q credits to the person who writes the best combat analysis report today. Got it. The sound of 100 students answering in unison echoed through the space. Rust nodded and exited the cage. Good, shall we start again then? He clapped his hands once, and the next participants stepped onto the stage. Are you serious? Sal asked in shock, but Divinity, still unable to suppress her laughter, continued her explanation. I'm telling you, in my vision, you were out cold as soon as it started. But I don't know exactly what changed or what the catalyst was. Something shifted right as the fight began, and suddenly I see you leaping into the air. Divinity burst into laughter again and raised her hand to mimic the scene. That move where you jump into the sky and slam down with your elbows. Shaking her head side to side and looking at Sal again, Divinity spoke as if she couldn't believe it. Seriously, you looked like you were possessed or something. Divinity's match had been a completely one-sided victory, but watching it, Sal had blinked twice in disbelief. It seemed she was hiding just as much as Sal was. The image of Divinity knocking her opponent out cold instantly with a 540-degree spinning hook kick was still vivid in Sal's mind. Even the sight of her returning to her seat and smiling brightly at him across the gym. Aren't you going to talk about those martial arts skills? Sal asked her as her laughter subsided, but Divinity shrugged and changed the subject again. Shall we meet at survival class after the break? I'm going to skip lunch and shower first. I feel like the gym smell is stuck all over me. She even shivered for effect, and Sal shook his head with a confused expression. My next class is administration? I didn't know classes were split during orientation week. Then, see you at the party. Victoria invited me, and when she said you were coming, I said I'd go too. Divinity paused for a moment, then asked. That's okay, right? Sal smiled and shook his head as if to say not to worry. Yeah, Victoria is a bit difficult. She teased me earlier too, and I have no idea how to talk to her. At that, Divinity's eyes sparkled, and the corners of her mouth turned up. Now I think I know what that vision was about. See you later then. What? What vision? Bye. Divinity. Divinity burst into laughter again and disappeared toward the dormitory. Sal couldn't shake the feeling that she was laughing about something involving him. Sal stood in the lobby outside the gym, debating whether to go to his next classroom early or grab something to eat. In the end, he surrendered to hunger and headed to the cafeteria near the dormitory. He had heard that the reports written during combat class would be reviewed by Professor Rust and then delivered to each student. Honestly, Sal didn't expect much from the content. His fight had been entirely a result of fear and panic. He recalled the various matches that had taken place during combat class. Most students seemed to have received some form of formal martial arts training. There were close-quarters combat styles that slammed opponents into the ground, as well as flashy moves like Divinity's kicks. Victoria's fight was the most confusing of them all. Her opponent had tapped the floor and surrendered as soon as it started. Had she threatened him before the fight? Or was there something about Victoria that he didn't know yet? Sal suddenly stopped walking, shook his head, and cursed inwardly. Why do I keep thinking about Victoria? The thought crossed his mind that going to the party tonight might be a mistake. Hannah, Divinity, and Victoria all three gathering in one space? Sal didn't want to get entangled in such complicated emotional lines. Shaking off his thoughts, Sal finally came to one conclusion. Let's just eat. Walking into the administration classroom, Sal was relieved to find there was no cage in the room. Of course, it was obvious there wouldn't be one in an administration class, but he was genuinely grateful that his body wouldn't suffer anymore today. As other students streamed in, Sal looked around and realized that most were faces he had never seen before. Did I walk into the wrong lecture hall? He walked along the connected corridor-like aisle that made up the lecture hall. On the podium, there was a large screen, a desk, and a single empty chair. This classroom wasn't structured with desks spaced apart like the workshop or terminal room. Instead, screens were embedded into the surface of a curved wooden structure, which resembled semicircular stairs rising toward the ceiling in tiers. Sal walked up the stairs and entered an empty aisle, only then realizing that seats were assigned, causing his anxiety to spike. In one corner, a group of staff members in white uniforms were gathered, but they were engrossed in conversation with each other rather than helping the students. A few students who asked for help were waved away, and one relatively kind staff member pointed toward the wall. Following the gesture, Sal saw a notice posted on the wall indicating the students' seating arrangement. Even with Sal's exceptional eyes, there was a limit to reading small print from that distance. He sighed and decided to go down the stairs to check the seating chart himself. But before he had taken even 2 steps, a sharp whistle sounded from behind him. It was quiet enough that most wouldn't hear, but it was sufficient to catch his attention. Turning around, he saw Kane sitting in a chair, gesturing for Sal to take a seat near the aisle. The seat was 2 spaces in from the aisle, so Sal turned and moved toward it. Seeing the name Sal written on the desk screen there, Sal turned his head to thank Kane, but paused when he saw Crutches leaning against the desk. "I heard you were hurt. Is it any better?" Sal asked, but instead of answering, Kane pushed the crutches under the desk, a faint trace of pain flitting across his face in the process. Seeing that he had no intention of answering, Sal didn't pry and simply thanked him for finding his seat. He didn't know Kane well, and more importantly, it was painfully obvious that Kane didn't want to talk about it right now. Sal wondered if he could use the thread he recalled from when the healer treated him on Kane. But he immediately dismissed the thought. He had only ever used that power to heal his own body and had absolutely no idea how to use it on someone else. When Sal looked down toward the podium, an imposing figure stood leaning against something that looked like a bladed staff. His smile was a bizarre mix of kindness and menace, and the look in his eyes as he watched the students bustling to find their seats seemed to silently say, "Aren't you going to sit down quickly?" He waited for a moment before finally shouting, "Enough, just sit anywhere for now." Then he put on a small earpiece and spoke. "Is this better? Can you all hear me?" His last words echoed simultaneously from invisible speakers throughout the lecture hall. "Don't just sit there blankly, answer if you can hear me." Sal and the other students answered yes, at different timings, and that alone seemed to satisfy the new professor, who nodded. Clearing his throat, he put the staff down on the desk and walked slowly toward the nearest aisle. His dark brown eyes scanned the students one by one as he shook his head in disappointment. "Raise your hand if you came to administration to make money." Most of the students looked at each other in confusion, but Sal raised his hand without hesitation. Only about 10 students reacted immediately like Sal. That's a relief. At least there are a few honest ones." The professor laughed as he looked at the students who had raised their hands. "Then let me ask you. When you think of administration, what usually comes to mind?" "Just simple office work. People who organize documents and stack up reports when accidents or monster appearances happen." "But is that what we do?" "Absolutely not." Scanning the students briefly, he continued. "Administrators are the giants of this industry, because they are the ones who know the structure of this new world. We provide the standards and systems that others have no choice but to follow. While taking this class, you will learn how to handle being a hero as a business. Business? How to manage yourself within a guild, and how to climb to the top. How to negotiate contracts to secure favorable conditions. Even after completing the class, some of you will only grasp a sense of commercial awareness. But with just that sense alone, you will be miles ahead of your peers." The professor smiled as he saw the students' faces stiffen. "And if you truly understand and follow what I teach, a few of you might become the next generation of guild masters. My name is Jez. I was the representative of the now disbanded Bastard Guild." Hearing the professor's name and the Bastard Guild, some students looked surprised. "Seeing your faces stiffen now, you must have already encountered Sinclair or Lars, right? We were one of the top combat-specialized guilds in the city, and even now, the Reavers Guild is struggling to break the revenue records we set." The professor laughed heartily, as if genuinely enjoying himself. "Over the next few months, I'm going to pass on everything I know. Our Bastard Guild even gave up our hero positions to come here. To make you capable of surpassing us. Simply put, it means you have to study your asses off." As Jez emphasized with a curse, a few students laughed. "What's in front of you right now is a guide called a folio. Just opening this will earn you your first ranking in this class. Completing assignments or missions raises your rank, and it goes on like that." "Oh, someone's raising their hand already. You want to ask what ranking has to do with administration? Good question." As the student who raised his hand hesitated, a few more hands went up. Jez finally slowed his speech and looked at the students with a puzzled expression. A female student sitting in the front row pointed at her desk and said, "Folio? What are you talking about?" Jez looked furious for a moment, then thanked the student. He immediately turned around, spread his arms wide toward the administrative assistants standing on one side, and glared at them. "What are you doing standing there right now? You had one job. This isn't even funny. Forget it, I'll do it myself." "No, don't move. How am I supposed to teach when you haven't even handed out the textbooks?" Sneering at the flustered assistants, Jez strode to one side of the room. Then he lifted a stack of gray binders effortlessly. The binders had a leather-like texture and looked solid and heavy. The bewildered assistants approached, trying to make excuses, but Jez waved them away. What a great first impression. Students came in to learn about the world of administration, and the first thing they encounter is you lot? Administrators who know neither preparation nor responsibility. Well, let's think positively. Jez hugged the pile of folios, walked up the stairs, and threw one into the air. The binder spun, drawing a large arc and landed precisely on a desk on the opposite side of the classroom. The student who received the folio stared blankly at the binder with a bewildered face. Jez didn't care at all and continued nagging the administrative assistants. Sal followed his movements with admiring eyes. Every time he threw one, the binder reached a student's desk with magical precision. Just by taking this one class today, you can build a better career path than these people. He took the last bundle and climbed the stairs toward where Sal was sitting. This time, instead of throwing it, he picked one up himself and placed it in front of Sal's desk. Sal looked at it with surprised eyes. His name was engraved on the leather cover. Looking around, Sal realized that Jez had already identified every student. Jez gave him a wink, then immediately tormented the administrative assistants once more with a thunderous voice.